Super Mario Advance is the first port in a lineup of old Mario games being remastered for the Game Boy Advance.
However, most importantly, it's a port of Super Mario 2 initially for the NES. As I make my way through the earlier Mario titles, I've decided to take a look at this version of Mario 2. It shares many similarities to the remaster found on the Super Mario All-Stars cart, though has enough differences to render itself individually. The Game Boy Advance port was received well and managed to get the short-lived Player's Choice label similarly to the GameCube. However, not many games reached this status on the Game Boy Advance to my knowledge, and they never really branched out of Nintendo's first-party exclusives. It also includes a variant of the Mario Bros. Arcade game that can also be played solo or up to 4 friends with a link cable. Little known fact, you can actually use any of the Mario Advance games to play multiplayer in Mario Bros. With a link cable, since they all share Mario Bros. Within the cart. You can easily select it just past the main menu screen. Otherwise, there's Super Mario Advance, Super Mario 2, and that's where the experience truly begins. After the success of the first Mario game, Nintendo went to make a sequel but released it exclusively in Japan. It eventually made its way over to international markets via the Super Nintendo's Lost Levels game in Super Mario All-Stars, as well as in Super Mario Bros. Deluxe with an unlocking score of 300,000 points, calling itself Super Mario Bros. For super players. In the North American market, we initially had a different game altogether under the same name as the Japanese variant. Mario developer Shigeru Miyamoto had other ideas after Super Mario Bros. And worked on a Famicom game called Doki Doki Panic. Famicom being the Japanese variant of the NES, more or less. Now, I feel pretty dorky even talking about Doki Doki Panic because it's literally something that takes up pretty much a quarter of any script covering this game. I simply wanted to address it so I can be able to further reference it in the review. If on the extremely unlikely chance you've never heard of Doki Doki Panic, just search it up on Google and I'm sure you'll get a limitless supply of results for it. Regardless, I'll quickly sum up the events so I can reference them further in the review. Essentially, the original Mario 2 was considered too difficult and had less than stellar sales in the Japanese market. With a lot of hope in their mascot, they decided not to risk the new, perhaps non-exciting Mario game, but take another formula Miyamoto had created and slap Mario characters onto it. It turned out to be a very interesting twist on an otherwise unrelated game. Still, this was the second Super Mario game, so a formula isn't exactly set in stone just yet. This was a neat move by Nintendo, but had it not gone down like this, who knows how different Mario would be today, if he would have even remained relevant, though Mario 3 would have probably proved otherwise regardless. The game starts off with a character selection screen, allowing you to pick between 4 unique statistics. Mario is all around balanced, Luigi jumps higher, Toad is stronger, and Peach has an awesome hovering ability. These all had their set of disadvantages and usually compensated for the lack of some other feature, though that's better left for the player to discover themselves. I'm not sure why Toad was given the role of the Muscle Man, but I suppose they couldn't think of another character to fill that role in Doki Doki Panic. Could this not have been a premature introduction to Wario? Perhaps this could have eventually inspired a larger role in the character for future games. Alas, here we have Toad. Speaking of Toad, in this Game Boy Advance port, the characters have all been given voices to accommodate their actions in-game. A lot of people have found this annoying, but I actually like it quite a bit. Why would I bring this up by speaking of Toad specifically, you ask? Well... when I was little, I always misinterpreted what the characters were actually saying. In fact, it was only a couple of years ago when I replayed the game and realized what was actually being said. Now, you might have noticed the box-based vertical scrolling the game utilizes. This was brought back from the original NES release as it was initially an accommodation to the Nintendo's hardware. With this, you often can't see just below you, so making leaps of faith will be common, and you'll probably die a lot due to the typically hill-based environments that only have small portions of land to fall onto. Why this made it into the remaster on the Super Nintendo was beyond me, and even more so does it feel out of place here. Sometimes it'll swap back and forth so frequently in a short window of time that it becomes very difficult to interpret what your momentum really is, so you might end up face first into something you shouldn't. This is more troublesome when you come to face the physics of the game. Now, they certainly aren't bad, but they are a bit slippery. Characters have bizarre forward momentum in this game, which could be partially to blame on Doki Doki, since that game did not have a run button. This was introduced for the NES release of Mario 2 to better coincide with the original game. Nevertheless, I found the slippery physics played a part in my deaths sometimes, whereas I'd intend to fall gracefully on a near platform, but found myself pushing much further forward than intended. This might be my own fault by going straight from Super Mario 1 to Super Mario 2, but then again, that's a bit of a humorous statement seeing as how everyone did that back in 1988. It's funny to compare the two because they are quite polar opposites in the physics. Mario felt very heavy in the first game, but not so much here, even despite his larger belly this time around. It was actually this game that set the standard for Mario's appearance in future games. Honestly, this game paved the way for a lot in the future games. I'm repeating myself here, but it's really hard to imagine what Mario today would have been like without Doki Doki Panic. I should be more specific though. The Mario universe is well known for its diverse and quirky characters. Most of the enemies originally exclusive to the Doki Doki Panic universe have become vital in the Mario universe as a result of this game. Most notably Birdo, Shy Guys, Bob-ombs, Pokies, and Sniffets. You'll encounter Birdo less times than the others though, since it comes off as more of a boss fight of sorts. At the end of each level you'll come across Birdo or something quite similar, who will reward you with a pizza. I know it's a crystal, but I've always called it a pizza because of how Mario says it, and that's just how it's gonna stay. Birdo is usually fun to revisit because of the unique ways in which to take it down. Usually you'll take its eggs and throw them back at it, but other times Birdo will only shoot flame balls, whereas you'll need to find another object somewhere to throw at Birdo. Speaking of which, this game works on a mechanic exclusive to Super Mario 2. This is the grab and throw move. The player in Super Mario 2 is able to grab any of the pre-placed roots scattered across the map, which below will contain one of many potential items. Most commonly will be a vegetable, but you'll find a number of other things such as a Koopa shell, which you can throw at enemies like you would kick one in the original Super Mario. Speaking of Koopas, why don't they exist in this game? There's really no reason not to include them in the remaster, as well as other Mario characters, but I suppose the unique nature fits into the charm of, well, what happens at the end of the game, to not spoil it for you. You'll soon find that you can throw vegetables at enemies, which is the equivalent of jumping on them in the original. However, jumping on an enemy in Super Mario 2 will do nothing. So why would you jump on an enemy, you wonder? Well, to pick it up, of course, and throw it at other enemies. Chain kills will result in a floating heart popping up, and if you chain enough, you can score an extra life. Or 2, or 10. In fact, there's a specific level where you can really exploit this for infinite lives. Now you might be curious about that heart that floats upward here, because you can also find them throughout the game in the level design. This is actually Mario's new life system. Instead of mushrooms and fire flowers from blocks, this game is a heart meter, and you'll be filling the heart meter as you collect them throughout a level. You can increase the number of hearts, which is the equivalent of hit points. How you do this is find a magic potion in the ground via a root, which you can then throw to create a door. If you go in the door, the world changes form and you're reintroduced to the classic Super Mario Overworld theme. The level's tile set changes mostly to black, but if a mushroom is present, you'll immediately notice it since it's the only specifically colored element on the screen besides you and the door. Enemies don't exist in these sub-worlds, so all you have to do is head on over to the mushroom and pick it up as you would a root to gain an extra heart to the meter. This meter goes back up to the default 2 slots when you complete the level or die, though you can repeat this process throughout the game. You'll need to take caution, however, when placing a magic potion, because if you don't throw it in the same location where a mushroom is, the mushroom won't show up. The sub-world you enter can't scroll past the radius you saw upon entering. Sometimes mushrooms will be placed further away from a potion, meaning it can become very challenging to find a mushroom in harder levels. You can even use the potions to warp in Super Mario 2, but unlike the first game where you jump across the upper platform, you'll be using jars to sneak into once you're in the Magic Potion subworld. Not every jar though, in fact this is quite rare to come across, though is still worth a mention. It's more so a recurring option from the NES era where you couldn't save your game, and would use this to return to the world you left off at. In this Game Boy Advance port, you get a sweet warping effect when going into it. Also exclusive to the Game Boy Advance port is this jar music you'll hear upon going into one from the regular world. Am I the only one who loves simple soundtracks such as this? If you find a magic potion in a jar though, be sure to bring it out first, because there's no subworld within the jar and it'll only disappear upon hitting a surface there. To conclude on the magic potion, should you finish the game, you'll actually get a second game mode where you can find the hidden Yoshi eggs in each level's subworld. It's a unique way to extend the playing time, though I was never too fond of it since it relies on trial and error exploration, and these magic potions don't respawn. Their roots can if you exit and re-enter a location, but they will no longer appear as magic potions the second time around. This is in tandem with health items. You've only got one chance to get it right, unless you decide to restart the level. However, despite potions not respawning, you can actually respawn entire living beings in the game if you like. In fact, this isn't always respawning, but duplicating. Here you can see me producing an endless supply of flamingos by carrying them off screen and returning to do the same again. It's nothing special really, but it's something fun around to play with. Super Mario 2's level design can be fairly intricate at times, but when it is, it's usually extending on a previously established formula and has a hard time keeping it fresh and exciting. For instance, there are a number of pits like this one that are very cool the first time around, but once it is repeated, it's monotonous. The same goes for other segments like where you ride a Shy Guy's stroller. These are both really great ideas on their own, but to see them make a return feels a bit cheap at times. The game shows it has potential to be diverse in these moments, like the time where you must fly to the other side of the level by using an albatross flying across the screen. Not only are the game's formulas reused frequently, but so are the locations. You can certainly say that for the first Mario game, though you do have to give that one a bit of a pass since it was the first more or less to pull this type of thing off successfully, at least for a console. Probably the largest offender in that aspect are the underground segments that get very tiresome very quick, especially because they often involve maze-like environments that are more frustrating than enjoyable and usually involve some heavy backtracking. This wouldn't be so bad if there weren't a lot of them, but unfortunately, there are. I was alright with the few puzzles in the original Super Mario, but they were a lot simpler and didn't take so much time to pass. Keeping in mind, of course, that Super Mario worked on a time limit, whereas Super Mario 2 does not. I do like, however, that some levels are set up for different characters. There are some areas that only Princess Peach can access with her hover jump, giving some replayability to the title, or perhaps incentive to start a level over again with a different character. At times, levels will also trick or persuade you into thinking outside of the box, like these Birdo eggs which can be stood on to travel across a wide gap, or finding that you need to remove some bricks with a bomb before entering the door that appears from the magic potion so you can access the mushroom. Frankly, there are a number of things to complain about in Super Mario 2, but then again, there's a lot which is worthy of praise. I think it's clear by the number of intriguing design choices. Then again, when a game tends to repeat itself in various ways, it'll inevitably become a bit to a lot repetitive. Super Mario 2 isn't a noteworthy game for its repetitive nature. In fact, you could wager that more towards the original Super Mario. Alas, there are undoubtedly areas in Super Mario 2 that needed improvement. But besides that, the graphics are great, the music is gorgeous, and the gameplay is fun. The game succeeds in many ways, to the point where negatives are relatively slim, though the one issue of repetitive underground segments continually gets on my mind with this one. Something else I can't get out of my mind is this big blue blob in the second level of the fifth world located in one of the jars. What is this thing? Seriously, what is it? Google itself has no idea what this thing is. I looked in the manual and I still have no idea what this is. Why does nobody ever talk about this thing? It exists in this one level and that's it. You can't interact with it, but it does hurt to walk into. Does anybody have any idea what this is? Hopefully someone out there can answer that, but to conclude, Super Mario Advance, or Super Mario 2, is still a great game despite its negotiable departure from the original Super Mario Bros. According to many players, myself included, this isn't the best entry to choose for your Mario fix, but it's certainly not a bad one. I recommend you give it a try because at the end of the day, Super Mario Bros. 2 presents an enjoyable experience.
No problem!